faces. It's always interesting to be in a nice group to discuss these IG issues. Well, the focus of this webinar today is the cybersecurity, cyber attacks. And recently, well, the motive behind maybe this webinar is what we recently discussed when it comes to the spam house attack. We did even a blog on that and describing what it is about. So the idea of this webinar is basically to go through the major components of cyber threats, cyber attacks, through the case of spam house. Yes, spam house is not that interesting per se, and I think the blog is quite enough about if you want to know more about this attack. But we'll try to go bit by bit, and here's what we'll try to cover in this maybe 20 minutes, and then discuss it more through the questions. Firstly, the types of attacks. We'll definitely not outline all the attacks on the net, but rather focus on what was used during the spam house attack as one of the types of attacks, which is probably the carries the greatest risk or the greatest potential when it comes to the attacker side. So we will mention briefly what the botnets are and how do they work, what the distributed denial of service attack is, what IP address spoofing is, and how do they do the amplification of the attack to cause greater damage. I'll try to go through that in a non-techy way, non-geeky way, and the idea is to clarify it in plain language. Now, within this part of clarifying the attacks, I encourage you to come up with questions at any point. Just stop me and go ahead with the question, especially if you need a clarification. If there is a wider question that you have about botnets or DDoS or whatever else, then you can maybe keep them for the end. But as long as it is related to what I'm explaining, just jump in and I'll try to reflect the question. And then we can move to policy or political challenges when it comes to cyber attacks, and namely also when it comes to cyber war and cyber warfare. There are a couple of issues which are interesting, legally speaking, but also practically speaking, which is attribution, distinction, and proportionality. Let's move into the concrete example of spam house and try to go step by step what happened there. The two players in this particular game were involved. One is the spam house, which is, and that's again a nice example of the existing industries on the net, which is basically providing the blacklists of all the IP addresses or servers around the world that distribute spam, usually, but also malware and other types of undesirable content. So what spam house basically does is it collects the reports about or monitors the traffic on the net, monitors where the most frequently the spam is coming from, and blacklists these servers, usually their IP addresses. Then they sell this blacklist to any company or institution that wants to protect itself from spam, for instance, so that basically whatever traffic comes to it, we are talking about Diplo, for instance, and Diplo wants to be protected from spam, we can rent in a way the service of spam house, use their blacklist so that whatever traffic comes to our server, unless it is out of their blacklist, if it is in their blacklist, it's not going to come to us, which is quite a practical way of fighting against spam and well, getting rid of tons of undesired traffic. The problem is that, of course, it is up to spam house and these companies like spam house to decide on a protocol and the way to put up the blacklist. So while we can believe that they're going to do it based on the real monitoring of the traffic, they might also, if they wish, put someone else on the list if they simply don't want to they hate someone or they have some commercial conflicts or whatever. Now, one would say obviously that it is a market-driven business, and spam house is definitely not the only one who's providing blacklist. So we can always choose if we doubt that spam house is doing a good job. We can always choose for someone else. So what happened is that they realized there is a lot of spam coming from one sort of servers called Cyberbunker, which is a hosting service based in Netherlands. This is a type of the open hosting which basically allows anyone to host anything on their platforms, on their servers, and they don't ask, as long as I think it's not about pedophilia and maybe Nazi material, I'm not sure. So they had some light limitations, but basically they did not worry if someone wants to rent their capacities for even for spam or for whatever they want. They didn't want to go into what's being hosted on their website. Spam House, of course, noticed that the spam is coming from these servers. They started blocking the Cyberbunker. They even blocked their internet service providers. So to some extent, it was a kind of a revolt of the Cyberbunker, saying, "Who are you to blacklist us?" and so on. And allegedly, they ran the attack. How did the attack go? One of the major tricks or techniques is usually to use the botnets. So the botnets are robots. Botnets, and bot basically comes from as abbreviation from robot, and the botnet is a network of robots. How does it look like? Those computers, and that's the usual question: are these computers specifically used for as bots, as zombies? No, these computers are zombies. The bots are our computers. Any one of us can have, at this very moment, can be a zombie, in fact, even though we don't know that. That means that we got a Trojan or a malware, any piece of malware code, which is installed into our computer, and which basically makes our computer to become a zombie. It uses our internet connection, it uses our processing time and RAM memory to do something else. So it is directed to do something else. It's a hijacked computer. And we usually cannot notice that unless we really monitor the traffic and the upload, for instance, of, on our network cards. Or, of course, if we have the antivirus software. So I encourage you to update the antivirus software as frequently as you can. And, of course, scan the computer from time to time. I've really tried hard to find the estimations of the number of, or the percentage of the bots around the world, and it's hard to find it. But there are some information from the previous cases where the armies of about 4 million zombies bots were discovered, and they were dispersed over 100 countries. And there is a saying, or that there were some estimations that these were not they were much bigger botnets, up to 30 million computers. And as I noticed in one of the previous blogs, when it comes to the botnets, to compare the army of, let's say, 4 million zombies that was discovered, I think, last year, the biggest army ever gathered on the earth in the history was the army of the Persian King Darius, which embarked to Europe to fight Leonidas and Spartans. This army had about 2 million soldiers from about 40 nationalities, okay, 40 countries, 40 nationalities at that time, 40 tribes. Compared this biggest army with one of the big zombie networks of 4 million, it's quite smaller. So, and we can probably expect many more botnets and bigger botnets to show up. The point is that all these computers are hijacked and controlled by so-called control and command CNC servers around the world, and these servers are controlled by certain perpetrators around the world, criminals or whatever. The interesting thing is that there are thousands of botnets, or even probably dozens of thousands of botnets on the net, and you can rent one easily. Anyone can rent one easily. There's a whole black market of botnets. I think some smaller botnets, about let's say 20,000 or 10,000 computers, can be rented for maybe $20–30 a month. So it's quite a simple thing, and it's not hard to find it. Well, you need to give a little bit of time to browse on specific forums online, and maybe even know a bit of Russian, because the dominant black market when it comes to the cyber attacks is Russians, which probably does not have to do only with Russians. It would be anyone else. It's just the convenient climate in Russia, so the Russian hackers are most dominant ones. So it's quite easy to rent a botnet and do any kind of attacks. Now, what are the botnets for? There are a couple of things that you can do with them, of course. Majorly, they're used for distribution of spam, because you can hardly filter the spam if you have an army of millions or even thousands of bots. It's hard to filter out and control the spam. You can use it, of course, to infect further computers with malware. You can use it for denial of service, which we'll discuss later. You can use it to get a revenue, because most of the websites now work on the basis of the ads and the number of clicks on the ads around the web page. So if you can simulate and grow the number of clicks artificially, then you can, of course, get more funds and revenues directly. And that's what you can do. You just imagine you have an army of 4 million bots which are clicking on ads, and that was basically this big case of 2 years ago. It produces a huge revenue, and of course the identity theft and other misuses. So the botnets are basically becoming one of the very fruitful business online, and it's very hard to locate them and to catch them, because they're all over the world, and you basically need to catch the command and control servers, which is not that easy either because of the IP network and again, the ability to mask the addresses and so on and so forth. Maybe just a bit of an info about how this economy, this black market of cybercrime works. You have a great number of crackers or hackers, basically people that are exploring the vulnerabilities of new software, Microsoft or any other, and there are different types of new vulnerabilities that are discovered, and probably the fresh one are so-called zero date, which are the most expensive ones, and no one knows yet about them. And then there may be many others that have already been exploited, and so on. So there is a market of selling these holes in the software or hardware systems around the world. That's a black market, of course. Then those that are hosting the bots usually buy this information about the holes in the system and misuse them. There are, of course, armies of hackers that are making the malware code. The people that are so-called bot herders are basically organizing and capturing more and more bots into their networks, and they're selling the botnets to basically anyone, including you, if you wish to do so, for different amounts of money. And the market is so big that now the prices are coming down, and as I said, you can really afford to rent or even buy your botnet for a longer period of time on the black market. And as I said, you can use it for different types of activities. This is no way an encouragement to go into this fruitful business of cybercrime, because I hope it will come to an end soon, but it's rather an information how it works. As I said, if you have any questions at any point, just jump in. Back on the spam house case and the botnet. So what was done was basically the let's say the rent of a network of bots or zombies which could do the attack on spam house. How was it done? The most usual type of attack done by the botnet is distributed denial of service, which means that the bots are asked to directly approach the server of the victim, which in this case would be spam house, and ask for a number of queries. Even the simple ping. Ping is a command where you just test if the server is there, if it is responding. But if you have thousands of computers at the same time pinging and checking or sending any kind of a request to a server of a company, of course, the server will not be able to respond all of them in real time because of the bandwidth of the processor units of the servers, because of the bandwidth of the internet connection of the attacked servers like the Spamhaus one, and so on. So they will simply have to clear one by one requests, and they have thousands of them. Of course, it will take a lot of time, which means that a legitimate request, so if anyone really wants to use the Spamhaus blacklist at some point, will not be able to, because the servers are jammed in a way. So this is the denial of service. Distributed denial of service is, of course, the notion that the attack comes from a huge number of computers or the bots at the same time, which at the same time makes it quite hard to filter out, to block, because they're not coming from single destination or single origin, single source. So you cannot just filter out some computers and prevent the distributed denial of service or the denial of service, but it's coming from the diversity of computers over the net, which also makes it harder to the server to distinguish what's legitimate requests and what's not. So basically, the computers or the servers become jammed in a way. Now, this is about the denial of service, which is distributed denial of service, which is one of the most common attacks. But then, what happened with Spamhaus was additional thing. It would be one way of attacking the Spamhaus servers by engaging an army of bots to send any kind of a request. But if you want to do even more, and that's what we found out from this case, you can amplify this attack. That means that you are not going to ask a simple question or a query to the Spamhaus servers and block them that way, but you're going to ask someone else, which are the DNS servers, something, and the DNS servers are going to send you a big response, much bigger than you can create in any of these bots. The bots are, as we said, ordinary computers. These are our computers, and we usually have a limited bandwidth and limited processor unit. So the capabilities of each bot are quite limited in the sense of how big amount of data can be sent to the victim. But if you use the bots to approach a DNS server somewhere on the net, to ask for a specific IP address of some web page, and as you know, the DNS service serves to clarify what are, or give us the response, what is the IP address of the web service we want to approach with the URL or any other address, and they send us back the response in sense of the IP packages, or it can send us the response who to ask if they don't know. If the DNS server does not know, it sends us the response who to ask further. So basically, DNS servers can, their responses can be quite big. And more than that, they have, the DNS servers are usually connected to a bigger bandwidth. And they're usually, because they are optimized to receive a number of questions, they're usually much more powerful machines than our typical machines that are used as bots. So if an army of bots approaches a DNS server and requests something as a response, and the DNS server sends a response back to each of them, which is a big chunk of or big package of data, this is quite a substantive amplification of maybe 70 to 100 times more data can be given back as a response to an initial request. Now you could say, well, what's the point of that? Because this data would be back to those who asked, right, to the botnets, to the bots, not going further to Spamhaus. Well, that's where the IP spoofing trick comes into. If my computer is used as a bot, and if I know what is the IP address of Spamhaus, I can tweak my computer and present myself as being a Spamhaus computer by using their IP address. So I basically set up, well, the virus on my computer sets up my IP address to be the same as the IP address of a Spamhaus. And then my computer approaches the DNS server, asks the question, and the DNS server sends me back the big package of response. But it doesn't send me back. It sends it back to the IP address where the request came from, and this is the Spamhaus IP address. So we've faked basically that Spamhaus asked that question. In that sense, all the queries that bots ask or send to DNS servers are multiplied by a bigger response that comes from DNS and sent straight to Spamhaus. The DNS servers of this kind, the DNS servers basically are there are numbers, thousands of DNS servers around the world, and the DNS servers are basically everywhere around. Now, the difference with this kind of attack is the problem in these so-called open resolvers, which do not check who is asking. They will simply respond to anyone. This is the point of open resolvers. The point was that if the DNS server of your telco or your internet service provider is down, or your company is down for any reason, that means, of course, you would not be able to use your internet connection. But if there are other DNS servers around the net that you can ask the same question, can you give me please the IP address of this and this website, and you could use them, then you could use your internet even if the DNS server of your company is down. And that was the idea. The idea was to have a huge number of open DNS resolvers on the net that anyone can ask in any situation. It was also the question of protecting the internet if someone starts changing the root zone and so on, that you have basically a lot of DNS servers that you can, alternative ones that you can control and so on. The problem with the open resolvers is that exactly that, the trust. They trust that they are going to respond to anyone, whoever asks, while the DNS servers in your company will respond only to the computers from your company IP network. The DNS servers in the internet service provider you're using are going to respond only to the IP addresses within their network, to their customers. The open resolvers respond to anyone. That means that if you fake the address and use someone else's address, they will simply send the packages to that address. And there is about, let me check, 27 million open resolvers on the net, which means that it's really hard to control. It's not easy to even shut them down there, of course, all over the net. And this way, I mean, firstly, the attackers can hide behind the botnets, and then they can hide behind the DNS servers, the open resolvers, and even multiply the attack. Now, the Internet Engineering Task Force figured out this possible problem back in 2000, and they even came up with the best practices document, kind of rules of the road, so-called BCP 38, the document which sets down or provides the guidelines how to set up the DNS server so that it's not opened. By the way, not only open resolvers exist because they have the attempt to be available to anyone, but majority of DNS servers that people set up in their companies are open because they don't know how to set it up. So there is a big issue on making all the DNS around the world to be closed and responsive only to the IP addresses within their network, which would then make it much harder to use the IP spoofing. But for the moment, as I said, there are 27 million of open resolvers or badly set computers, DNS servers, and this is still quite a challenge. Now, what Spamhaus did as a smart company, and that gives us another idea how the internet works now and what are the new services online. They engaged a third party, which is a Cloudflare network, because obviously that was not the first time Spamhaus was attacked because of the type of the work they do. So they engaged a Cloudflare network, which is a company which mitigates the cyber attacks, the denial of service from their clients. So if any of their clients is attacked by the DDoS, the Cloudflare basically takes over that attack. The Cloudflare is nothing else but the huge network of servers around the world, which distributes the attack equally on all of their servers by using the Anycast technology, which is in fact having a number of servers, thousands of servers if not, around the world acting as one, virtually as one. So if a single server is attacked, basically they all take the attack, which means that if you have thousands of computers attacking the same computer at the same time, if there is an anycast protection, all of these attacks or some of the requests will be sent to one computer in Africa, another to some computers in Latin America, some computers in Europe, and basically it would be really, really watered down. So you would not feel the denial of service, basically. And that's what the anycast service in this case is used for as a protection. The problem with it is, or the possible problem with it is that if there is a huge denial of service attack, that means that there is a huge chunk of messages being sent to the attacked computer. If it distributes all this junk traffic through the anycast network, you basically distribute it throughout the world through the normal, ordinary connections on the internet. Because how is the internet connected? And now we're back a bit into the basics of the connections of computers. There are two types. One is, as they call, the star or direct connect. The direct connections, the star is the ISP, and the direct connections is any ISP, internet service provider, can be connected with any other directly. So you have the mix of these two architectures on the net, and the other option is the IXP, the Internet Exchange Point, where major internet service providers are connected to the same node, basically, to exchange the traffic. Not going into how the IXP works at the moment, but just how the connection is set up. And if you take a look at any 2 or 3 networks, how they can be connected, you have, for instance, network A and network B, which can be private networks, which are connected privately if they do business together. If there is a lot of exchange between these two networks, then they do not go in between the internet exchange points, but they can connect to a third network through the internet exchange point. And the interesting thing is that the major telcos and even the content providers like Google, Facebook, and so on use both of these. So with some of them, they're privately connected with a devoted link. With the others, they're connected to the internet exchange point. So when we are back to the issue of anycast servers, if we want to distribute the denial of service around all these computers on the net, or the servers that belong to Cloudflare, that means that some of these connections will suffer, will basically take over some of the junk traffic. On the level of internet, it's not a big deal, of course, because the internet is big and robust, so usually we cannot feel it. But it depends on how heavy the attack was. And then if you observe the whole topology of the internet, you will notice that there are millions of networks, basically. As they say, the internet is a network of networks, and it's really a distributed network. So to some extent, the ordinary users could not feel this junk traffic going through the net because it's not such a big scale. And I like this topology illustration of AT&T because it's quite detailed. I mean, it shows all the great number of networks, but it shows us also how complex internet is and the traffic routes are on the net. Now, as I said, the spam house, or let's maybe get back to the Cloudflare network. What they do is basically, as I said, they receive the attack and they disperse it to their own network around the world through the anycast scheme. Some of the traffic that was dispersed goes to their private interconnections with other networks like tiers or internet service providers, even the companies like Google and the others, and some other go to the internet exchange points. When the attackers, in case of spam house, figured out that they cannot do anything because the attack was dispersed by the Cloudflare, they started aiming directly at the internet exchange points, which are, again, if we go back to the topology slide, which are the connecting links between the major telecom operators and internet service providers in region. And there is a huge number of internet exchange points around the world, and they're critical. They're definitely the critical infrastructure. They enable regional traffic regional connections, instead of being forced to go all around the world to reach the neighboring country to us, we simply make the interconnections in the region, and the traffic can go from one internet service provider to another. The internet exchange points are the technical facilities. They are usually well protected, and they have huge capacity and huge bandwidth. But if you do a denial of service with this kind of the application amplification, as we said, of about, what was it, 70 to 100 times bigger attack, and effectively reach, which probably to many of you that are not engineers does not mean much, but it reaches a peaks of 300 gigabits per second of junk content. That can probably cause some disruptions even on the IXP level, because they need to handle all this junk traffic somehow. And New York Times reported that there were some disruptions in the ordinary work of users around the net because of the attacks on internet exchange points. It's not quite likely, because the exchange points are very, very robust facilities. But it is true that the IXPs do have weak points as well. And in response to this, not only in response to this attack, also there were, I mean, this is not the first attack of this type, it's maybe just the biggest one thus far. The industry that is working with the internet, with setting up and protecting the internet exchange points around the world, they decided to, or they are pushing the two measures to protect the IXPs from this kind of attacks. One is that all of the internet service providers that are connected to one IXP, so there is a limited number of internet service providers or telcos connected to each internet exchange point, and we all know who they are, and we all know their their IP addresses. So the first level of protection is not allowing anyone out of this circle of connected internet service providers to the IXP to approach and ask anything the IXP. That means that the IP spoofing would not be possible, because you cannot get into this network unless you're one of these ISPs. One way to fake this would be if you would know the IP address of one of these ISPs, and then you could fake and pretend that you're one of these ISPs, and again be able to attack the internet exchange point. So the second level of protection would be to try to hide the addresses of the internet service providers connected to the internet exchange point, so that basically anyone, not everyone, could be able to know these IP addresses and do the attack on the internet exchange point. It's quite a complex issue of protecting the infrastructure, and the technology is usually in battle with the malware and the attacks. But I would say that they are quite on the equal footing and catching up each other. So it's interesting times. That much about the attacks, and I will let you later on go ahead with questions. But to sum up this part on a political level, or on the challenges which come to the policy issues, there are a couple of challenges that are identified also in totally not related to the Spam House case, but for instance within the cyber war discussions, how to define a cyber war within the international humanitarian law. And what are the open issues within the international humanitarian law that are even greater problem in cyberspace. Now, it's totally unthankful that an engineer talks about the international humanitarian law, so I'm not going to do that. But I'll just mention a couple of basic problems that appear, which are in a way linked to technology as well. So if we go one by one, the problem of attribution is basically the inability to identify who is behind the cyber attack specifically. In the common international humanitarian law, so not related to cyberspace, there is also a problem of attribution, because when you have armies or movements, armed movements within a country or within a region, and so on. It's not always easy to attribute an attack to any of them, and especially not to the government of a certain state. When it comes to cyberspace, it's even more complicated because usually you cannot even know who did the attack. Because of the botnets and because of the, for instance, in this case, Open Resolver's DNS, it's very hard to track back the IP addresses of those who originated the attack. So not the bots, not our computers, because even though we are probably liable for not protecting our computers and let them be hijacked and misused, but we are not behind the attack. And the case of Estonian attack in 2007, or attack on Estonia, which largely came from Russia, was also a good showcase of attribution problem, because you could hardly say even who did the attack, and let alone that the state, in this case, the state of Russia, was behind it, which would be a precondition to, one of the preconditions to start to treat it as an act of war, act of war in this sense. The other problem or a challenge on a political or policy level is the distinction, which is also recognized in the international humanitarian law as one of the principles that there should be a clear distinction between the legitimate military targets and civilians. But there is, which seems quite easy, but it's not easy even in conventional war, because you have so-called dual-use technology like power plants and electrical grid and many others, which are at the same time supplying the army and can be the legitimate military targets, and at the same time supplying civilians. So it can cause great casualties. In case of cyberspace, of course, it's even a bigger problem. And when you observe all these problems with the infrastructure that we discussed previously, you see that the whole network is interconnected, and there is a big spillover, possible spillover effect of such kind of attacks on the, let's say, non-legitimate targets, even if we can say that this attack maybe was legitimate, whatever. But simply the civilians or the non-legitimate targets are involved as well, and it's quite hard to control the effect of such an attack. And then there is a case, and then there is a principle of proportionality, which basically in the international humanitarian law prohibits attacks that may be expected to cause incidental loss of civilian life, injury of civilians, and damage to objects that would be excessive in relation to concrete and direct advantage, military advantage anticipated, which means, to put it bluntly, it's okay to kill civilians, but not too many. In this case, in case of cyberspace, it's again very hard to estimate the effects of the possible attack, and if it would be proportional to the goal or to the advantage, military advantage anticipated. So these are the issues that are now being tackled by NATO, also by their Center of Excellence in Estonia, and many others trying to define these and help defining these principles or analyzing them when it comes to cyberspace and cyber war. And this particular case of Spam House is an interesting showcase of a private cyber war, as I like to call it, because it has the whole range. I mean, the scope of attack is huge. It's a massive attack, which could possibly cause disruptions on the net beyond the target per se. But this time, fortunately, it was not the case. Maybe some users could feel light disruptions, and the internet exchange points, of course, did feel it, but because of their robustness, they managed to mitigate it. This was definitely not such a tragic example of attack, but it shows the potentials of cyber attacks, and we suspect that the army of botnet was quite small in this case. But imagine an army of maybe 100 times bigger army of bots that might be rented or purchased for a serious attack on infrastructure, it could really cause huge damage and disruptions beyond the target as such. And to conclude, of course, there are political aspects of this, and as we usually use this pendulum of regulatory interests about the internet. On one side, we have the governments, which are very interested to control the internet. On the other one, we have the moves towards the open internet and less control and less regulated, especially less controlled by the government's internet. And this pendulum goes back and forth as the events happen in cyberspace. In this case, obviously, any kind of cyber attacks, especially those that are that get a spin within the media, raise the attention of governments and give them another good justification why the control should be more put on the by the governments on the internet. Ginger, that's a good question. I think now it's again more, and we have seen the Wicked meeting in Dubai, which is one showcase of the growing interest of the governments to control the internet. And cybersecurity is definitely one of the issues. Those of you that maybe have been following the recent talks about Chinese attacks on the cyber attacks on the American ground, mostly on the companies, not mostly, but exclusively on the companies. There are a lot of analysis that the Chinese, with it, of course, the problem of attribution is there, so no one can say that really the Chinese government is standing, our military army is standing behind the attacks. But these attacks are used to be, or are now analyzed as another attempt of China and Russia to additionally strengthen and emphasize the importance of cybersecurity, and as one of the greatest ways to protect the security, these governments, of course, see the control. And that, of course, does not mean the control in the sense of security, but probably also over the openness, because they see the openness as is a big obstacle to security. Also national security, because the Western way of understanding cybersecurity is just about the attacks. The Russia-China understanding of security is more into the information security, which means the information aggression and the cultural aggression and media aggression, content aggression from the West. So in that sense, it's not only about attacks when it comes to China and Russia. And in a way, it seems they're trying to find or to respond to the US, if the governments are behind this, of course, to respond to the US with their own language. Meaning, if the US is only concerned about cyber attacks, let us show you that these cyber attacks are a real threat. And that means that we need to protect the internet, and it means we need to close it down a little bit, and then have more of the government control and so on. So in that sense, I think the pendulum is quite now on the side of the government and stricter government control. Let's see how it's going to move in the next period. The area of cybersecurity is huge, and we just touched upon one little bit and piece of this spam house case. There is a lot about cyber war, there is a lot about cyber espionage and so on, but let's stop here and go for questions and comments. On technical level, on political level, I open the floor and I'll take a bit of my coffee until I get some questions. Yes, the record will be available. It's not currently, but it will be soon as we post it online. So I guess in a couple of days we'll also share the link. can attacks be redistributed to smaller levels by even further development of any caste system? I would say this development of or the use of any caste systems in protection against cyber attacks is quite innovative way as well, and that's something that obviously is a new business, and it's quite expensive business as far as I could see. So the biggest companies that really fear of cyber attacks start basically engaging these companies that mitigate the attacks more and more. Now, the more companies we have that are doing the Anycast around the world, and the more cyber attacks we have, the more junk traffic we'll have around the world, because it's dispersed through the Anycast. So that raises again the concerns of junk traffic flowing to our connections, ordinary connections, and possibly disrupting our daily operations. Why botnets are so readily available? Because there is no efficient way to block them or to chase them, and because it's a market, as you could see. I mean, this market is seriously rich. You have full competition. You have even services in this black market. So you can rent a botnet and do whatever you know with it, or you can rent a botnet with a support, or you can rent a botnet with specific malware, piece of malware for what you need, and you can even get a consultancy to guide you through the cyber attack. It's seriously huge market, and I think the problem of chasing bots basically is, to a large extent, the problem of botnets is the lack of awareness of us as users, and probably our responsibility for our own computers, because there is not many people that really update the antivirus often, that install the patches on the software and so on, and that's quite a big issue. Ginger said, we seem to imply that Russia, China, and other countries are using security for information control. Does the USA also use security as motive for control? I would say the US is also using it, but for instance, now you have the CISPA initiative, which is another document which requires, in the name of security, that the data that the companies have related to cybersecurity attacks, including the private data that might be there in their disposal, that they give it to the government and to the authorities, basically, to be able to fight against cybercrime. So yes, I think US is also using it. I think US is mostly concerned about cyber attacks, as I said, while Russia and China see it much wider. They are, in a way, it is their ground. They are much more skillful, it seems, at least, in Russia and China to do the cyber attacks. It's not really true. I mean, the US is quite good in that, and we could see it with the Stuxnet virus, which was one of the most advanced pieces of malware of code ever done. It was done by the US and Israeli. So the battle is quite equal, but the Russians and Chinese are not really controlling their markets, and they're in a way allowing this black cyber markets. So they're not so much concerned about security on their own, and of course their business is not that dependent on the internet as much as US one is, because US is dominantly the dominant business on the internet is the US one. So the Chinese and Russians are more concerned about the political and cultural aspects, which means the dominance of the Western content and Western mindset through the internet to their territories, and of course possible consequences, as we've seen in the Arab Spring and so on. Andrew says, did we need this to happen to drive action on a technical level, since we are sitting on some pretty exposed infrastructure? The problem with the infrastructure in general internet infrastructure is that it was built on trust. I mean, back in days when the internet was built, it was no one really thought of viruses or misusing it because it was a small number of people which were using it, and the whole internet bloom basically was made on the so-called end-to-end principles, where most of the new innovations emerged on the edges of the net without changing the infrastructure. This TCP/IP protocol is the same as it used to be. Now we have IPv6 and DNSSEC and maybe some other updates and patches, but basically the core of this protocol is the same. And it was built on trust, and now this trust is heavily misused, and now it's not so easy to change this core functioning of the internet. So it's a combined action of engineers on one hand and policymakers. And as I mentioned, the Internet Engineering Task Force did come up with a number of guidelines on how to protect network better. But the problem is that the users, including those that are setting up the DNS service in their companies and so on, are not tech savvy. They're not aware of this, and they are not obliged to protect their network. So in that sense, it's a huge component of cybersecurity is basically the awareness and the skills and investment in that. Then the question from Marilia was, do these companies like Spamhaus strategize with the governments where they are based? Is there a common strategy? Is there governmental endorsement of any kind of these types of strategic steps you recommended in Spamhaus case? Marilia, I guess you refer to the work that Spamhaus does and the Cloudflare. I don't think these are quite new businesses. Well, the blacklisting is not that much, but the Cloudflare business of mitigating the attacks is quite new business. To the extent to which these businesses are based in Western countries, I think, and it seems that dominantly they are in Western countries, including the US. I think they have quite a good cooperation with the government, which is a two-edged sword. On one hand, this public-private cooperation or partnership between the security companies and the governments is of course necessary, because governments are not skilled enough or equipped enough to fight, and probably they shouldn't. I mean, if there is a good market way or to encourage development of security services in the private sector, it's always good. But on the other hand, that means that the link between these companies and the government and the power of these companies to act on behalf of the government, governments to protect, including the government infrastructure, means, and there is a big, there are many disputes about that in the US, for instance, means that these new companies, security companies, basically have a great access to the personal data through the government systems, because they need to have a lot of information about how government systems work, including some of the private data, in order to be able to analyze the attacks and prepare the new solutions. So this is a two-edged sword. Definitely, this public-private partnership when it comes to cybersecurity is quite a sensitive thing. Faisal says, is it possible to shut down the internet through this type of attacks on Spamhaus? I would say no. I would say no. One of the biggest threats, in a way, or biggest concerns has always been shutting down the root zone service on the net, the icon root zone service. But as those of you that might have gone through the issue of root zone service know, the root zone also uses the Anycast scheme to copy the root zone file basically around the world. So there are about 140 or now I think maybe even 200 copies of the root zone file on the net. So even if an attack would be launched on the 13 root zone servers, this would probably disrupt the internet for a short while, but not entirely, because the Anycast would start working. It will probably slow it down to some extent, but it's a short-term thing. I don't think it's a risk of that dimension. But it's hard to estimate because we've seen now the attack, which was about 3 or 4 times bigger than any bigger in sense of the load of the junk traffic, bigger than anything we've seen thus far. And it was a corporate attack against another corporation, not even a corporation. Cyberbunker is a kind of a hosting service, not that powerful. So I don't think they even had the capacity to rent huge botnet to really do bigger things. I think the consequences could be bigger if someone would be more ready to cause the disruption. But I don't see it on a really catastrophic level. It's rather incremental, and I think we should be worrying now about what's coming next and starting to prepare and so mitigate in advance. Clive says, does ICANN have a specific role in addressing cyber attacks? Up to my knowledge, ICANN is mostly concerned about the root zone servers and DNS security, of course. So the DNSSEC is a mechanism that should enable authentication, basically, of all the DNSs, so that you can't misrepresent, you can't fake that you're someone else when it comes to the DNS. You can't act on behalf of someone else, but you could check always if the domain that you're contacting is the one, if the DNS server is the one. In that sense, yes, but I think ICANN is more widely assisting a lot, exactly in this case of open DNS resolvers. Many other companies which are and organizations around the world that are fighting or trying to make them set up their equipment and DNS servers properly. So I think in that wider sense, ICANN is supporting the major flows when it comes to the DNS system. And as you could see, the DNS is still a very, very vulnerable component of the net. Marilia, what was the technology US used to attack the Iranian nuclear plants? How was the worm supposed to work? It was not a botnet in that sense. It was the Stuxnet was a virus which was shaped in such a way to recognize the specific Siemens facility which was used by the Natanz power plant nuclear. It's not a power plant. It's a facility for enriching the uranium in Natanz in Iran. So this facility used a specific Siemens system, set of hardware, software components of Siemens. So the Stuxnet was composed in such a way to recognize, of course, travel around the net until the moment it's not the net really. I'll tell you how it was targeted, but in a way it was aimed to recognize the system when it is in the Siemens system, specific one, use the flows of that system, go to the command center of the facility, run the turbines that do these are the physical turbines that run the enrichment of the uranium. They have the spinning within, and the virus basically raised the frequency, the spinning frequency of these turbines up to the burning point. So many of them exploded. I think 90% or something. Well, we never really found out what was the damage, the real damage, and if there were victims and so on. That's something that the Iranians did not disclose. They did in a way recognize that the facility was destroyed, 90% of its capacity, and the Israelis confirmed formally, Mossad confirmed that they were behind it. They didn't say that CIA was behind it, but it was obvious that the intelligence services were behind it as well, because one would need to know what is the specific system in the Natanz compound, and one would need to know what are the specific flows in this specific Siemens system. There was a lot of intelligence work in this. And the virus basically was, there are many theories about it, but I think one of the logical ones was that it was distributed through the USB keys, which ended up in the hands of some of the Russians or whoever engineers which were working in the compound, and ultimately they brought it in the compound, because the compound of course was not connected to the net directly, as we would say. The problem was that it was not done in such a way to hide itself. So unfortunately for those that wrote the piece of software, malware, the virus went out to the internet, and then we could see it on our computers as well, which made it easy for the security antivirus companies to catch it quite soon, and to analyze it and to disclose it. And now you can find the malware, the full code of Stuxnet on the net, I think even for free, because it's quite spread now. And having in mind that it is the most advanced piece of malware ever put, and that they say there was a team of 10 high-level professionals working for 6 months full-time on this, which is already a big cost for just anyone to do it. You can figure out how complex it is, and now it's available. It's in a way a weapon of mass destruction, which is available on the net for anyone who can use bits and pieces of that to tweak it to not work only for the Siemens type of the system, but something else and so on. It's quite tricky in a way. That was from Maria. Stephanie says, what preventive measures can be taken by the online community, especially end users? Awareness is definitely one of the things that all of us need to do. As I said at the beginning, I believe that maybe 1 out of 10 of us have some kind of a virus on the computer or Trojan, and might be used as a botnet, as a bot, and we are not aware of that. So as long as we can protect our own computers, I think that would be quite a good idea for the beginning, to protect our own computers. Besides that, of course, supporting the initiatives like not closing the open resolvers, but if you're working in a company, if you have a DNS server, try to make sure that that it is protected as much as possible, that it is set up properly. That means that the engineers, the administrators behind the DNS or any kind of service you have in a company would need to read a little bit more and probably go to some training. And that truth is that costs, but it is a secure way to at least be more secure on your level of the company, but also be more sure that your facilities, your computers, your servers will not be misused for some kind of attack like this. So in that sense, that's also one of the ways to protect. Wireless is also another way to protect. That doesn't mean that you should close the wireless. Now there is a trend of opening the wireless connections around the big cities worldwide, Berlin and Brazil and so on, so that you can use most of the connections that are in the city, but still that you need to authenticate through the SMS or through some other email or whatever. And again, we're back to the clash of anonymity and privacy and so on, but that's the pendulum. That's one of the pendulums that we have to fight: security and privacy. And the balance is hard to make. But anyhow, awareness is definitely one of the things. On the level of small and medium enterprises and private actors, the most. So I think we should be aware of that. 1 hour after the beginning of the webinar, I think time to close. I see there are no more questions. So I thank you all for the patience. I hope it was useful. As I said, this is just a small piece of cybersecurity. We have the course. Diplo has the online course on cybersecurity, which runs for 10 weeks. So there is much more to cover, and I encourage you to take a look at it, that one, and take part in it if you're interested in the topic. I guess we'll go on with some more topics on this in the next period. If you have any ideas, do let us know of the topics what you would like to hear. and at the end, I think the webcast will be provided for review in day or 2 or 3, and we'll inform you on that. Thank you for joining us, and keep in touch. Thanks. Bye.